Okay. All right. You should be getting connected here. Okay, brilliant. We're in. Okay, let me just confirm this detail and then we're off to the races. Okay, check, 2212. Okay, let me just confirm this detail. Excellent, we're in. Off to the races. Except now I can hear myself. Okay, excellent. Everything is good. So, okay, check 22. Always a bit of setup. Now, what we're going to be doing is actually working on this irrigation plan. I've got the document right here for me to look at. So I'm going to explain what's going on here. It's a fairly involved schematic, but we're going to get through this together. Okay, so first and foremost, interesting. Okay, so what we've got going on here is a 13 existing apple tree orchard. These trees are close to about 10 to 15 years old, somewhere around that. The trees on this side, as well as some of the other trees added to this existing orchard, are much younger and they top at about 7 feet. So we're going to supplement all of them with drip irrigation as well as new berry rows and some new fruit trees. Now, if you're wondering why the irrigation appears to be a foot wide, it's just for color coding. This is going to be representative of what the irrigation path will look like, right? So this is actually the garden over here. This does need to be modified and we'll be putting in the schematics for this as well. But it's a simple grid pattern in a garden, so it's not too complicated, fortunately. There we go, that's a little better. Well, let me move myself a smidge down. There we go. That's better. Okay, so the spigot itself is right here. Let me orient the paper. So the spigot is right here. So I actually need to move these items. I was working on this last night. So the spigot is right here. Okay, so we've got a fairly decent slope here too, just to give you guys an idea of that. Let me turn off the parallel projection so this appears a bit more realistic. So what we have going on here, okay, so this is a quick representation of the landmass. So you can see how it actually does tilt down quite a bit here. And this is important because we've got a couple hundred feet of distribution tubing and drip irrigation running here. Now, fortunately, the spigot in this area has good water pressure. It originally did not when the water was turned on again. However, now it's adequate for our irrigation purposes. So we have 4 zones in this area. We have one which serves the fruit trees downhill of the spigot. So that's a plum, 2 apricots, a second plum, a peach tree, a pear, and then it serves an apple here and here because they were already in place. And then this zone also satisfies this peach tree as well. Then we have a second line which runs up to these 2 trees. That line continues over here. It goes uphill. So this was all carefully calculated and then tested before we made this the active irrigation system for these 3 trees. Now these are hardy citrus, which actually can survive in Northern Virginia, which is zone 7B, which is a feat for citrus. Normally you'd want to be in at least zone 8, but this is a yuzu, a chandran, sudichai, and then flying dragon. So between those 3 trees, they will produce foods that are originally, I believe, from Japan, and they're the closest things to lemons and limes that'll grow in this area. In fact, the yuzu right here is actually bearing fruit in real life, even though the tree itself is relatively small. It's only about 1 to 2 feet high. Now, the zone that's on the yuzu and then the other 3 fruit trees here, that's 2 nectarine and a second peach. Nope, excuse me, that's actually pear. And then those are all in one. The third zone are the berries here. So we've got goji, we've got gooseberry, seaberry, which is not necessarily the best performing plant in this area. Those plants do prefer a bit of sandy soil, but we'll see how they go and adjust. That's part of the development of this homestead with clearly a lot of space. But we have a lot of other plants here. Fortunately, they're all going to tolerate a pretty similar watering schedule. The final zone is down here. We have some new trees. We have, excuse me, cherry, mulberry, hazelnut, and these are pomegranate. So we're going to continue modeling this out. I'm actually going to redo this slightly because when I zoom out at this level on the model, I want it to be clear where the pipes are going, right? But I'm almost wondering if it'd be better to do this on Photoshop. Generally, I would do this system that I am doing now, but I think for these purposes, this works. So the right, so this goes here, then it wraps the tree, and then this goes down here. And it's those 3 trees. However, this one goes right over here, and then goes there. Then, that's zone 1. The important thing to think about whenever you're doing irrigation is what is the water pressure going to be like? How many trees will you have receiving water? That and then the slope can impact a lot of your design decisions. And then you begin to wonder, well, why do you want to do drip irrigation? Do you want something that's the most efficient? Do you want something that's the most sustainable? Do you want something that's low maintenance, that's bulletproof, right? This system is going to require next to no maintenance, which is exactly what I like. And I like that for a couple of reasons. Number one, as much as I do enjoy being outside and hand watering, that can get a bit tedious. And of course, on occasion, it can be inconveniencing, right? Then you need someone to go over and babysit if you're out of town. But the cool thing is with drip irrigation, it's pretty much set and forget. And the reason why I find that personally valuable in terms of client projects is because then you give something that is actually low maintenance, right? Set, forget, and then it's lower liability, lower volatility. And then if something does falter, it's highly modifiable, right? Sometimes you'll have these PVC irrigation systems and they're really quite tedious. Also, drip irrigation is actually client friendly. It's not extremely technical. It's not something that requires years of acumen and expertise. Instead, it's something that, with a rudimentary willingness and volition, a client could actually go out there and add a new system if they so choose. So that is reason number 427 why I like drip irrigation so much. But as is the perennial circumstance with SketchUp, we have a bit of software to, excuse me, tidy up here. Because what I want to do again is color this classic SketchUp. Right, this is zone one, as I said. So this serves these trees. Now the drip irrigation connects. So this is all distribution tubing. So what that means is this is tubing without holes, and the tubes that go around the trees are emitter tubing. So they have holes every 12 inches. And what that allows is water to come out at regular intervals at a consistent pressure. And that level of granularity allows the plants to receive regular watering. Now, the system we have also connects to a Wi-Fi enabled Bluetooth hub, which is not that sophisticated. It sounds like it is, but it's pretty simple. You can hook it up to a rain delay so you're not going to overwater these plants. But one of the factors when you consider the irrigation is what are the plants going to be there? If it's just an apple tree and it's surrounded by grass, you might not be able to get the water to saturate the ground as much as you would like. When you have other plants, then you get richer soil. So clover, lacy phacelia, chives, Siberian iris, so on and so forth. These are all plants present in these guilds. So the ground can handle more water. So a rain delay is not necessarily something you need. It's something that can be helpful. It's, again, modular. So if you'd like to include that, it's possible. I generally say when it rains, let it pour, and build a system that can handle that, but retain enough water when there are not quite drought conditions, but there's not the influx of water that you require. So the more retention you have of moisture in the ground, the better off your plants will be. So this is zone one. Now let's move on to zone two. So we've got this one here. So what we want to look for is exactly how this connects. So this one goes directly from the spigot to this tree here. So this is such a sweet project. The client just loves all this stuff. It's so great because this is going to be a tremendously um, effective property, right? We've got over 100 different kinds of food-bearing plants. It's just unbelievable. And it's just going to be so prolific. Like you wait a couple years for everything to grow and mature that's new, right? I've done the calculations. This will provide literally thousands of pounds of food a year, and that's valued at thousands of dollars a year. So this right here is zone 2. So this one is pink, maybe a magenta. Okay, so what we want next is to demonstrate how this actually connects. So this one goes a bit over here and then jumps way up here. Again, these demarcations are a bit oversized, but this is for the purpose of the illustration, not so much the purpose of the actual outer diameter of the tubes. Okay, so again, this is zone 2. I now, as you can see, as this is taking place, it's kind of a crazy schematic, but we bridged the gap between what was necessary and what was reasonably accommodatable. That's what we want. Some of these apple trees are nearly 20 feet tall and don't really need the supplemental water, so there was no point in doing that. But then there's actually a path right here, so we had to put this piping in conduit lining just to protect it. So now, originally when I was working on this, I thought I might show the concentric rings, but I think it's okay. This is more apropos. Now we're going to edit section 3. And section 3 is purple. Now the thing is, section 3 and 4 actually connect to this spigot. So when I was originally calculating this, I wanted to see if we would need to separate this lower orchard area because these 3 yuzu are about 15 feet in elevation above the spigot. And that's about, let's actually measure, this is to scale, 109 feet. I was actually going to guess about 100 feet. I should have said it so it would have been shown that my estimation was that close. Not, well, what about 9% off? But what we tested was the water pressure to make sure that these 8 trees, the cherries, the mulberries, the hazelnuts, and the pomegranates would all receive water flow if we have it up here. And thankfully, the water pressure was sufficient for that purpose. Again, everything is supplemented with a guild or an assortment of plants to accommodate them and help retain moisture and then water, and then the plants and trees themselves would collectively be healthier working together. So we need to represent how this one goes down. Because even though this is technically its own zone, it is on zone 2. Now, the client on this property has a Yarbo, which is an autonomous yard mowing machine, and it's autonomous but not fully able to determine whether or not something is a pomegranate tree versus grass. So it's actually cut down these trees a couple times. So not only did it do that, cut down a 6 foot pomegranate tree, two of them, it did the same to a hazelnut, and it did the same to a thick, about a 2.5 inch diameter trunk peach tree here. Excuse me, it's a pear, right? That's what I thought. And then it unbelievably dragged it 30 feet, and I was just shocked that it was able to do that because it's a sizable tree. It's got a bumper mechanism on the front that should determine when something is obstinate to the point of maybe I shouldn't attempt to mow this, whether it's a building, a tree, a mature tree, or what. But it did, and thankfully the pear tree was caught early enough that it survived, but it has done quite a bit of damage otherwise, even though these areas were technically on its GPS exclusion. So that's one of the other caveats we've had to consider with this whole um, diagram. Mm-hmm. Right. Getting such bad lag on SketchUp, I really don't know why. I've got a 3060 graphics card, which is pretty adequate, so I'm not quite sure why I'm getting such lag, especially for just such simple rudimentary geometry. Okay, so this is representative of the irrigation schematic. It looks a little bizarre, it does, but what it's doing is ensuring that the 17 no 18 no 21 new fruit trees will all have water, plus almost, what is it, 42 berry bushes. These circles, don't count them and second guess me. They do need to be updated. There have been a couple plants that have been updated, again, pending Yarbo destruction. But what's going on is everything here will be irrigated. Now, is this schematic a bit crayon-esque? Perhaps. But something I've seen time and time again going to sites and other people's homes is they have no schematics. They don't know where the irrigation is. They don't know how old it is. They don't know who did it. They don't know what the materials are. They don't know anything. They don't know nothing about nothing. And that's a problem. That's very frustrating when you have to go in there and retrofit. In fact, on this exact property, we're retrofitting a previous irrigation system in the garden. So that's an ordeal, but it could have been made easier had things been built better, had there been schematics, had any information been provided at all. So when I create this master document for a client, all of this will be included, right? So they know the materials, they know the duration, they know the exact layout. So this is all exactly as it's laid out in real life. The only exception is that there are rings of the emitter tubing. Again, that's brown drip tubing with holes spaced every 12 inches. But those are pretty obvious. They're all above ground. These pipes are all subterranean. They're about 18 inches deep, or as much as possible. Right here at this apple tree, it's too mature to bury the root, excuse me, the tubing under the root. So this one has a minor incursion above the soil, but that's not an issue. This stuff isn't going to be running during the winter, only during the growing season. So that's going to be early, mid-spring, once the last frost is done. The water will be turned on, and then plants will be watered until about the last frost. So in zone 7B in Northern Virginia, this project's location, that's going to be about April 19th to October 20th, around that. So somewhere around 6 months. It's a pretty good growing season and a lot of water. Now, the other benefit of all of these things being on a slope, again, we're looking at this with a bird's eye view. When we look at the actual terrain, you can see, I know the parallel projection's on right now, so it's not quite realistic. You can see the slope. The trees are right in this area. What's going on here? The water is going to go down the slope. Now, when you look at topography, this is when contours are very handy. Anywhere that you have relatively equidistant spacing between the contour lines, this is a smooth gradient. It's not that steep. Now, these, I believe, are all spaced about 2 feet distance in height. It might actually be a foot. But the sharper corners show you where the water is going to accumulate. The closer the lines are, the steeper the terrain. So right here, it's a bit of a hill. It's much more prominent than this hill. This is more gradual. You go up the hill, it takes you a minute. You walk 30 seconds and you're down the hill. But it also shows you where the water is going. You can look and see an indentation, right? There's a shape. It's not flat. There's a curve. It goes like this. The water is going to funnel into this area. There's actually a drainage in this area. It's near the chicken coop. But this allows you to look at the water and understand where it's going to go. Now, when you look at the top-down view for the trees, what do you notice? It's all that relatively equidistant spacing. Again, this is a pretty flat, gradual slope, but you can use that to your advantage. You can create what are called swales and build up little wells at the southern or bottom part of those trees, which will allow water that's going downhill to accumulate and then saturate the ground as it deposits in that spot at the swale. That's a very useful tactic, although it's not super necessary on this project because this is not so much of a gradient or such destitute and thirsty plants that we're really going to need to implement that strategy. In California, when I was working in conservation in the Santa Monica Mountains, that is something we did frequently, especially using on-site materials. Now, this is the advantage of grass. Grass, if you cut it up and then flip it on its top, you can use that, and because it's already a dense mesh of interwoven roots, which is one of the reasons that why grass is actually not great for turf or soil fertility, it's very useful in creating these little swales, especially when you have to oftentimes dig up grass to plant trees anyway. So let's take a screenshot of this and put this in the document. This is one of the later things that I have to do. We're very nearly done with this phase of the project. We had some issues with the Yarbow. So thank you to everyone who's showing up right now. I'm still trying to get the hang of these streams. I enjoy sharing the process. I find it to be pretty fun. This is something I'd be doing anyway, so if I explain the thought process, I hope I'm disseminating some useful information, right? This is a real project. It's taking quite a bit of time on the entire thing, but it's a sophisticated project. We've got a lot going on. The next thing I'm going to be editing is this meadow down here. So if we look at I want to activate just some of the terrain, right? We don't need all these contours. This is the surrounding land context. Again, this is what I was saying. You can see how there are two, they're essentially ridges. These are not dramatic hills. So there's probably only 40 to 50 foot difference here. Again, this property is only at about 300 feet in elevation from sea level, which is not very high. But this difference in the terrain eventually becomes a tributary to the Potomac River, and you can see that taking form in the indentations of the land. Now you can actually see this in this entire property, right? You see a ridge here, the water comes down the side, it gets funneled into this wash, and then eventually goes into the Potomac River. That's why the larger context is very helpful to know, even though this green section is the actual property that we're concerned about. So I want to go edit the garden now because this is the next thing to do. So I've got my scenes here. Give it a second to load. There we are. Excellent. So don't need that. It'll save some processing power for my poor 3060. I know, what's my processor? I don't even remember. I have a good spec computer, but SketchUp takes resources apparently. Let's hit a quick save. I hate when SketchUp crashes. So there's actually an error here I need to correct first. You can believe it. I know, it's crazy. I swear, SketchUp's behavior is so inconsistent. Oh my. It's so inconsistent. Oh my God. Like, I'm selecting the group and then it takes that input as, oh, you'd like to exit the group. There we go. That should be extended by 4 feet. I'll go to the top down again. So we've also added okay. So we've got some plants to update here. We've got a lot of things going and growing. We've got Jerusalem sunchokes, or Jerusalem artichokes, also known as sunchokes. We've got onions, we've got green onions, we've got Swiss chard, kale. We don't have horseradish yet. That needs to be added. Turmeric, ginger, ton of tomatoes, tons of peppers. We've got some of the hottest peppers in the world. We've got Trinidad scorpion moruga. But just in case nobody wants to eat that, there are also bell peppers, jalapenos, and uh, Thai peppers, right? Some more casual stuff. But the bell peppers are, of course, actually pretty chill. So we want to reflect that. So first things first is to, man, terrible performance right now from SketchUp. I'm not sure why. So first things first is to make a group, and then we're going to do about 5. This is not perfectly representative because um, my preferred way of gardening is more integrated with the natural environment. I do a mixture of seeds, direct sowing, as well as plugs. I don't like to actually plant everything as plugs. I like to direct sow things, anything in the squash family, anything that's in the anything that's a bean, those things I like to direct sow, as well as some cool other crops. I actually did sow a lot of lettuce here, iceberg, romaine. What's the other one? The other buttercrunch. I did direct sow a lot of those because lettuce is one of those things that is kind of finicky. I like things to survive and then select from the survivors. Now, we're not hybridizing and breeding lettuce, so we don't care about the hardiness as much in this particular instance, but still, what germinates and grows will be your winner. So, as we go ahead and update this, we need to remember that there's actually a worm bin right here. We're going to circle back to that in a minute. We've got 6 of them. Now, these vermiculture bins, I can't believe how laggy this is. I really don't understand what's going on. Update the scene, and then that way we've got it looking a bit more realistic. So I might actually come back and do this one by hand. This is proving to be quite tedious. Um, might have my intern actually do this, do a hand illustration. I think that'd be far more beautiful anyway. Um, I think that's what we're going to do. This is, it's not too tedious. It's just not, I find, um, as like thoroughly useful as a schematic. I might end up just dropping this in a new project and trying that. I'm gonna play around with this because I don't like streaming whenever I'm having like technical difficulties. It's, you know, a bad look. It's not that helpful. I want things to be streamlined. I want things to like pick up and make sense immediately. So what I'd like to say to everyone who, you know, picks up on these streams, I really appreciate it. It's very fun for me to do these. It helps give me an entirely new frame of reference whenever I have this sort of thing. It creates it creates a lot more of a relationship, a more outward relationship with the design project. I think about things rapidly internally as I work, but to disseminate the information in a manner that is conducive to an audience, whether that's a client or some one of you, it actually helps a lot for me to just slow down and think about it because I have all the schematics stored upstairs, but those things need visual aid to be presented to other people. It's not useful if it's only digestible to me. So the question is, how do we make all of this easily digestible for the client? How do we make all of this easily remediable in the future? If somebody who isn't me has to go through this drip irrigation in the future, I don't want them to have to dig up half the yard to find a couple lines. Now, it's obviously going to be more obvious than that, but the point remains, because I've been that guy that's had to dig everything up, and that sucks. Nobody wants to do that. Frustrates the homeowner. It's more time, right? Just organize things from the get-go. So the other thing about the garden that I wanted to point out very quickly is it's difficult to ascertain the actual plants here because I don't utilize row crops in gardens. I find that to be a zealous attempt to control the geometry within a garden, and then you lose out on potential. So this bed is massively seeded. It's been given super rich soil. There's a ton of development in the soil microbiology. There's vermiculture. There's 10 different kinds of plants, both in the ground and above. And what that allows is a system of plants to grow, right? We didn't methodically place every lettuce plug. Some we did, and then we cast a lot of seeds. And they're sprouting because we've got this grid-like drip irrigation in the system. Now, that gives us a garden that when we go to it, there's a much more prolific output of plants and growth. And it's very useful when you have things like lettuce or basil, right? Like you don't need, like those plants are very obvious. You don't need them labeled. But still, there are a lot of things here that have been labeled, and that makes it a lot more, um, excuse me. It makes those plants a lot more understandable, right? Because, my client in this project, he knows what peppers are, he knows what basil is, but does he know how to recognize a Jerusalem artichoke? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I have to teach him. Does he recognize passion flower? What about Corsican mint? What about which peppers? Which? So that's why I like to supplement everything with the plants in the diagram with actual signs in real life. With weatherproof markers, I would like to even utilize some more decorative sticker apparatus because then you get something that's a little bit more beautiful, right? This is a mature garden structure and system. Let's introduce a complementary system of beauty that identifies, beautifies, and then intensifies the production of the garden. Because that's what we want. Nobody wants an ugly hodgepodge. Nobody wants a mess of unknown plants and or infertile soil. And this garden is none of those things. We've massively retrofitted it with new irrigation. We've done a variety of new plants, perennial and annuals, right? There are opportunities to collect seeds for those annuals for the next year if the family is so inclined. And then the garden is tremendously more fertile. The soil is more rich. There are worms to facilitate the decomposition of materials that will be converted into worm castings. It's one of the most valuable systems for a garden in terms of nutrient profiles. The worms also have the benefit of eating food scraps, right? So, for example, if there's something moldy, you can't give it to the chickens, you can put it in the vermiculture bin. And that creates a very low maintenance, autonomous system to decompose stuff. That is the kind of thing we like. So, with all that said, oh, hello to the new viewer. I was just wrapping this up. The point essentially is when we look at this garden, which does need to be updated, we've got a system of plants that will collectively help each other, and that is supplemented by the watering system, the drip irrigation that's on a 1-foot squared grid. So everything receives water. There are vermiculture bins in most of the beds, and everything here is growing well together. That is critical. So we're gonna pick up the stream again next time. I'm actually going to switch gears and work on another project here in a moment. I have another update to do for a different client. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to try to make these streams happen regularly on Wednesday and Fridays. Hopefully that is a schedule that accommodates you as much as me. But everything said, thank you very much for watching. Until the next stream.